Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. My name is Ronsley. This is episode number 356, and I have a little treat for you. It's a compilation done by my team of some previous episodes, and today is all about success in podcasting and the power of podcasting that it brings to your business. We have Phoebe Greenacre, who talks about her journey and how the podcast catalyzed not only her business but also her personal evolution. We have Dave Jackson, who is a legend in the space, by the way. He talks about boosting credibility of your podcast and shareability and how you can actually unlock your audience engagement. We have Todd Cochrane, who also has been podcasting from the very beginning. He talks about the different shifts that have happened in podcasting since he started, which was over a couple of decades ago. Angela Henderson talks about her podcasting journey and how it's transformed her business. Petra Zink talks about creating a trusted authority, and Matson comes in and talks about the authentic challenges and rewards faced when you're creating a podcast, especially from a production standpoint, while she talks about the importance of maintaining geniuses. And then we have Glen Carlson at the end that is very contemplative about the COVID era and how that has affected business and how that has affected podcasting. So come, let's learn. Phoebe, how has your journey as a podcaster impacted your journey as a business owner?
So my podcast is just 1 year old. So last June, I was traveling from Kenya to Bali and I had to quarantine in a hotel for a week. And I thought, what a perfect idea or perfect time to start my podcast. I'd always wanted to start a podcast. I love interviewing people. About 9 years, I did a TV presenting course and focused on interviewing. So I love interviewing. I love hearing people's stories. And I feel like it's the stories that really help inspire my clients to really go after their dreams, live outside the box, and really break the rules of society and kind of just light up their own path to what makes them feel happy and content and be glowing inside and out, business, body, and mind.
In your opinion, as a podcaster for so many years, how can we increase shareability of the episodes we're producing?
The first one comes in the actual podcast yourself. I interviewed two people. One was Jack from a show called The Darknet Diaries, and he gets like six-figure downloads every week. It's an amazing show.
Wow.
And I asked him, I go, how are you getting so many downloads? Like he puts a tremendous amount of work into it. It's kind of like an NPR style show, but the stories are about hackers and people getting hacked and things like that. So it's really well produced. And he said, I just asked my audience. And so I was like, no, seriously, what do you do? And he goes, I asked my audience. And he said, if you think about it, we're all kind of like, man, I wish we could join a network or something that I wish we had a team to tell the world that my show is here. And his answer is, well, you have a team. It's called your audience. And what he did was first, he made sure his show was good. He would ask people, like, on a scale from 1 to 10, where 10 is I'm going to tell everybody, how likely are you to share this with a friend? Because that's what you're looking for. And what I hear a lot, and I get this, is anytime we start to promote ourselves, we get really nervous. We feel awkward. And we feel like in the States here, we used to call it like a 1970s used car salesman whose goal was to get this car off the lot. It was a bucket of bolts. And I asked somebody once, and she said, I just feel salesy. And I go, so you're telling me your podcast is a bucket of bolts then? And she goes, well, no, I worked on this a long time. And I was like, okay, so you're actually helping people. And she said, yeah. And I said, so don't feel salesy. You're asking them, how can I help you? Whereas if they go, hey, I see we're at the 18-minute mark, and obviously you still like this. Hey, could you do me a favor? If you're probably listening to this on your phone, and there's probably a share button right there in the upper right-hand corner. If you know somebody who would benefit from this, could you click that button and send that to them? Boy, it would just mean the world to me. That's one that you do in the podcast. But another thing that I just kind of scratch my head on is on your website, you should have a page that makes it really easy to subscribe in Apple, Google, Spotify, and Amazon. Those are like the top four. And the reason for that is if you say, hey, go to schoolofpodcasting.com/subscribe, I've just now reinforced my brand. I'm not having to tell you, hey, go find me. That's the one. Hey, you can find me wherever fine podcasts are. I'm in all the big apps. Okay, well, I go back many, many, many moons ago, I worked as a grocery bagger.
Mm.
And if I'd be on my knees and I'm throwing whatever noodles on a shelf, if somebody said, "Hey, young man, can you tell me where the green beans are?" I didn't say, "Oh, they're over in aisle 3 where all fine vegetables are." No, I would actually take them over
Mm.
and grab the green beans and put them in the cart, because if the green beans were in the cart, that money was going to pay for my paycheck. So I made it, I
Yep.
made it so easy for them to get the content. And so when I hear people say, "Find me," and I'm like, well, that makes it sound like you're lost and you're missing a branding opportunity. And also, if they know it's just, schoolofpodcasting.com/subscribe, they might share that with their friends. "Oh, I found this new show. Just go to that." Well, if you start linking to that website, that has a potential to boost your SEO. So that's one I always kind of scratch my head on. And there's nothing bad against Linktree or all these other, services where you go and you put links. And I'm like, you already have a service that you can put a bunch of links on. It's called your website. And so, um, quit spending $10 to, this link service.
Yeah.
Just send people to your website and make a page that has everything that's on your, whatever account, Linktree, et cetera, et cetera.
Cochrane in the house, thank you so much for doing the work for all these years. How much has podcast changed since you started?
Oh my goodness. Podcast has changed dramatically. We had no hosting. We had no way to create RSS feeds. It was all just kind of made up and on the fly in the beginning. And that's why everyone was pretty much a nerd or a geek that did podcasting those early days, because it really was put together with, a spot ties. We really had to try to figure out what we were doing. And of course, now today, it's easy. You can start a podcast really almost instantly. But yeah, it's a long, long road since October of 2004. So I'm facing years here in about 2 weeks.
What shows are you currently running, and how much work goes into creating those shows?
Yeah, the primary show, Geek News Central, which is the Genesis show, I probably, well, it's twice a week. And I do have a producer that I pay now, but for years I did it all by myself, start to finish, probably 3 to 4 hours to put an episode out. And then I do the new media show with the Rob Greenlee. It's a competitor over at Libsyn.
Yeah.
Him and I've been doing that for 10 plus years. And it's at newmediashow.com. And we do audio and video with that. And it's once a week. And then I do Podcast Insider, which is an internal show, basically the show for the business at Blueberry.
Yeah.
And again, that's once a week. So I'm doing 4 episodes a week. And the Blueberry one's handled by a pro team, but everything else is on me. But I'm unique in the space. I don't edit. So that saves
Interesting.
me a significant amount of time.
Started your podcasting journey. I mean, I know you spoke at We Are Podcast, but I didn't know that you didn't have a podcast and you came to We Are Podcast, and that's where you learn everything. Literally, I'm hearing that for the first time. I don't know how many years later, but that just gives me goosebumps. And thank you for implementing and executing, because that's really why that whole movement started. How has that evolved to what it is today? Like, what's the podcast now, and what changes have you made since that launch?
Yeah, I mean, the podcast now is the Business and Life Conversations podcast with Angela Henderson. We will be rebranding in 2023. And that's just because over the last 4 years, I've evolved both in myself as a human being and both as a business owner and both as a podcaster. So the podcast will continue, but we're just going to name it slightly different. So that's something that's exciting for 2023. But what is it? I mean, where has it evolved? I mean, there's so much goodness with podcasting. The fact is that podcasting, I believe, amplifies things in your business tenfold more than any other platform. And I don't just say that for shits and giggles. I genuinely say that I can be posting organically on social media. I can be posting inside of my Facebook community. I can be sending out emails, and all those little breadcrumbs that I've just talked about add up to awesomeness. But the podcast, it drives traffic to my website because we also have an SEO strategy around it. I'm able to share that organically. I'm able to get on other people's shows. I'm able to bring on guest experts that I probably would never have been able to reach out to say, hey, can you write a blog for me? Well, why are they going to write a blog? That's work for them and it's going on someone else's website. But if I'm like, hey, do you want to come to an interview? All they have to do is just show up and they get exposure, really. But it's just growing me also as a human. You know, when I first started, I felt like I needed to do certain types of shows, like how to build an email list and how to do this. And I still do those how-tos. But as I've kind of learned more about myself, and I think podcasting also does that, is you learn more about yourself and what you're going to say and what you're not going to do. And you also go, you know what, this is my own freaking platform. if you don't like it, leave. There's the exit. And so I've kind of also grown my confidence through the podcast. I found my voice a little bit more through the podcast. And through that, also, it's allowed me to get keynote speaking opportunities at different events. Like these are just some of many of the opportunities and awesomeness that I've had by starting a podcast.
If you had to explain your podcast to someone, what would you say?
Trusted Authority, the podcast show, is all about. It's basically mini workshops and inspiring interviews on all things becoming the go-to trusted authority in their field. Because most of my clients are what we call technical experts. They are incredible with what they are doing. Their knowledge is way out there. But then when it comes to communicating and being actually recognized for it, it's a different story. And the podcast is all about having those mini episodes, having tangible tips, tricks, strategies around how you can make the switch, what may hold you back to progress to the C-suite, but then also bringing in incredible guests who share incredible wisdom. But at the same time, it's also an amazing opportunity for me to build my own credibility plus business.
You're talking, obviously, is that you speak other languages. Like, did you have to learn English, and how is that with the accent? And the reason I'm asking this question is because everyone, irrespective of their language skills, asking themselves, who would even listen? Why should I put my voice out there? Why should I say something? What if people disagree with me?
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought it up, because to be honest, that was the reason that I didn't start it myself earlier also, because I thought English is not my first language. I constantly come up with my own words and phrases and sayings that don't necessarily make sense. And the first show that I launched was actually called the Talk Series, because at that stage I had listened to podcasts for probably another 6 years prior to it myself. And I realized it was not quite that level. And I learned all the big mistakes, from the worst sound quality to not actually hitting record when I had an interview, like not being prepared for an interview. And then after 52 episodes, literally a year later, I switched into Your Brand, Your Future. And then another 50 episodes later, that's a bit of the theme here, I launched it to my current podcast, which is called The Trusted Authority. So, it's kind of 3 years in the making, building the skill, building confidence. And do I still make mistakes? 100%. Everyone makes mistakes. And when they hear you, when they can hear you between, what you're up to, what your personal stories are, they build so much more trust in a relationship that leads to business opportunities a lot quicker than when you send proposals and when you do the cold calling and when you send LinkedIn messages.
What did you change in the third one as a result of learning different things from the first two?
So what I'm doing is a solo episode and then an interview, and they're alternated, that people are not getting bored with just listening to me or just having interviews, but also that I can build my own credibility and can put in my own thoughts and not just have guests. That's my thought process. And that's completely different to my first show, which was a talk series. Like, I did not do one single solo episode on my own. I invited guests. And at that stage, what I did, I had my 7 set questions and everyone got the same questions. Now I'm preparing a lot more in detail. Everyone gets their own individual and tailored questions based on their background, based on their area of expertise, but also to create a bit of a narrative. And I also created more of a bit of I've got different months dedicated to different themes to tie in with the mindset where people are at. Like, what do people already think about, and who can I then bring on to complement this topic, but also bring in my own stories? So that's a big differentiator. Also doing my research in terms of the guests, because you can build a really strong relationship once you've done some homework. And Mark Schaefer, many will probably know him. He wrote 10 best-selling books, and he said to me, I've never been asked those questions. You were the most prepared in my 20 plus years of being actually a speaker. You were the most prepared host. And then he reached out to me and said, can I come back on your show because I have a new book? So that already shows how much of a relationship you can build beyond just asking random questions, but simply by showing genuine interest and support for the other person. So that's a big change.
When you were thinking about doing the podcast, you mentioned this journey. Right now, it's a totally different art by itself. Like being a journalistic interviewer, your only job is to get someone's story. That is a learning curve. And even doing this is a learning curve and also draining curve.
I love speaking, and the knowledge that I have in this regard it does feel like it's infinite. But I do get to the end of a recording session and go, and that's it, I'm done. But because of how I set it up and because I work so last minute, what I then have to do is write the show note, write the newsletter, write some social media posts and at least get the essence of all of that done so I can hand it off to the VAs. I've tried using some AI to help me with that. It's not working enough for me, and I'm finding that it's actually just easier for me to type something out while the
Yeah.
episode's still fresh. Part of that is because I'm big on authenticity. And in fact, that's part of my spiel. You know, I teach people to speak with authority, confidence, authenticity, and with
Yep.
impact.
Tell me about the podcast. Where is it at? What's it been doing? What kind of results have you seen from having it?
100 plus episodes. So mid-COVID, we put it on pause. So a few things. Firstly, if I'm very honest, I just got a bit bored with the process and I examined my objectives, and my goal was to have a layer of material that would help people understand the value of the Key Person of Influence program, right? So there's over 100 interviews with our clients. Each of them, like the minimum has done like a 300% growth. The largest is, sold their company for 100 million. And that was sort of the goal. And I got to 100 podcasts. I'm like, okay, this is good. And, we've got it all organized. When any type of new prospect starts exploring working with us, we can give them like industry specific, a couple of different ones. Like we just had this super abundance. So there was this big tick in my mind, and I never saw myself as a podcaster. I started the podcast to, I suppose, build the asset to support the business. So then that was happening in one layer. The other layer was, man, we were busy over COVID. So while we navigated it really well, it required a lot of my attention.
Yep.
And I wasn't in the mood. I was in build mode. And I was just like, you know what? This is ticking the box. I don't see it as a major priority. So I put it on pause. And recently, actually, in the last 2 months, I feel like COVID was like a cocoon process for us. It was like this metamorphosis where we were going through a transformation that some people are only now looking at going through, right? So we're a few years ahead. And now, as a major investor in a super fast growth AI-enabled SaaS platform, we're building Dent directly and the KPI accelerator directly into GPT's API and about to reveal, some pretty cool stuff there. There's definitely a new spark in me around having conversations that are a little bit more relevant to this. And I think it is the friction that comes out of that, open, perhaps uncomfortable debate that creates great democracy. That is the building blocks of a great culture and a great society, and a society that I want to see my daughter grow up and into. And I think the more I can help entrepreneurs and founders get out of survival needs into, like you, being able to influence and make a difference and share ideas, I don't really care what those ideas are, right? Even if they're very different to my own. I just want you to be able to share them and share them well. And the more people doing that in that environment, I think the better the world gets faster.
You mentioned reinvigorated to have conversations. I genuinely believe that artificial intelligence will probably be the biggest conversation of our lifetime. What kind of conversations are you seeing that you want to have on the show?
I'm not the super high tech, I'm not a coder, I'm not sitting there running Python scripts, based on output from GPT. I'm pretty big on distributed systems, distributed value, localized systems, localized value. So my whole thing is more how to help these traditional businesses stay relevant. That's where I'm most interested. And, on reflection, there's two parts of that. There's what is the unique value that I have to offer? And even getting clear on that is a challenge in itself. But it's no good you being clear on the value. You also have to share it with others, right? And ideally in this world at some degree of scale. If you were to see how am I going to measure my life? For the most part, how to help everyday business owners that are kind of experiencing this existential threat leverage these tools in a way that's not super overwhelming, the way that's really practical, that allows them to take that value and share it with the world, but probably with a pretty radically reimagined business model.